Welcome to the Nerdstalgic podcast with your host, the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm.
We have seen the future, a universe cursed with life after death. It all started deep beneath the Yucatan Peninsula, where an archaeological discovery took us into a new age, bringing us face to face with our origins and destiny. Michael Altman had a theory that no one would hear. It cursed our world for centuries to come. This, at least, is his story. Dead Space Martyr by B.K. Emerson. Howdy beans, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Nerdstalgic podcast. I'm your host, Luke the Human. Hope you're doing well, hope you're all good, as per usual. As you heard in that absolutely stunning introduction by yours truly, today's topic, we're going to be talking about the Dead Space book tie-in novel, Martyr. But before we get into that, I just want to do a bit of housekeeping, because I like to keep my house nice and clean. So make sure that you follow me on Twitter at the Nerdstalgic podcast, Nerdstalgic_pod, to be kept up to date on anything that I am doing. Also, make sure that if you are listening to this on YouTube, that you like, comment, and subscribe, because interaction helps out the most when it comes to YouTube. If you're not listening to on YouTube, you can find me on YouTube at the Nerdstalgic Podcast, and you can see all my latest episodes on there. So, as I said, today we're going to be talking about the tie-in Dead Space novel, Martyr. Now, I'm really excited to talk about Dead Space, primarily because I have a huge love for Dead Space. I recently played the Dead Space remake when it came out on Game Pass. I played that majority of Christmas, and which is kind of funny because Dead Space is not a Christmassy game, but all of December I was playing the Dead Space remake. I played it twice. I played for it once. Like, I'm that much of a hardcore Dead Space fan. I think I've told this story before, but I've played Dead Space 1, 2, and 3. I remember when I first played Dead Space, I played the demo on the original on the Xbox 360, and I was way too young. I think I explained this when I did my review for Resident Evil 2. I didn't play a lot of scary games when I was a kid because I was easily spooked. It's not so different now as an adult. I'm a lot better now as an adult, but I don't tend to play horror games. Even though I enjoy the horror genre, I don't play many horror games because there's not many that I really enjoy. I'm a new fan when it comes to Resident Evil. But in 2008, when Dead Space first came out, my idea of what a video game was, quote unquote, was you just shoot zombies and they die. Like it was like Left 4 Dead. It was like you didn't have to do anything more than just shoot them. Whereas in Dead Space, you had to be clever. You had to reserve your ammo. You had to reserve all your resources. And me being a little kid and being terrified, I didn't know that. So here's me shooting the necromorphs and they're not dying and freaking out, and was like, nope, this game's not for me. And then years and years went by, and then I was like, you know what? I'm in college. I've got loads of free time. I never got to play Dead Space. It's backwards compatible on the Xbox. So I went in and I bought Dead Space 1, 2, and 3 pre-owned for cheap. Played them all one after the other. Absolutely fell in love with the lore, fell in love with the world, fell in love with the whole idea of Isaac Clarke and his story, and the idea of the Church of Unitology, and the actual what necromorphs are and the markers, and the whole idea of shooting the limbs off. And then it's not until I got to university when I started actually properly studying for my BA in game design that I realised that there's a lot more to Dead Space than what is first initially saw. Like, for example, there's no HUD in Dead Space. It is all the information you need to know is what you see on screen. So, for example, the health bar is on Isaac's back. That's his health bar. His status as well is on his back next to the health bar, so you know how much status you have left, if you can freeze enemies or not. And again, everything is all visual based, and then you have all music cues, so you know where they are, the monsters, if they're above you, if they're behind you, if they're going through the vents, if they're going to pop through the events. So the idea of the game design side of it shows how clever that game is, and the series is very clever. Like, I will admit, even Dead Space 3, which I know a lot of people don't like, and a lot of fans don't like that game. I quite enjoyed Dead Space 3. I had a lot of fun playing it. It's not as good as Dead Space 2, that being the best. But I am a huge lover of Dead Space. And when the remake came out and they changed things to fit the lore of Dead Space 2 and Dead Space 3, and there's hints of the fact of where they leave it off with Dead Space, the reboot, is kind of giving the idea of where they want to take the series going further if they was to do a Dead Space 2 remake, which I really hope they do. But coming back to what I was saying about the remake, I played it during December. I played through it once. I didn't think that I could. I then played it a second time round to get the true ending. So to get the true ending the second time round, you had to complete the game first. Then you had to play it in New Game Plus. But while you're playing New Game Plus, you have to find, I think it was about 6 or 7 mini markers. Then when you find these mini markers, you can take them to a certain location. And then once you put them on a table, when you complete the game, you have a separate cutscene. And that sort of hints of sort of Isaac making the new marker. I think it's the red marker, which will be then set up sort of Dead Space 2 and so on. So to say I'm a huge fan is really sort of short-changing it. Really, I am a big lover of this series. Now you're probably thinking, Luke, if you're a big lover of the series, why are you not starting with the video games? Well, good question, random listener, and I'll explain why. So, last year in season 2, I reviewed the Bioshock Rapture prequel novel. Right, it was the first that I'd sort of reviewed other video game novels in the past, but that was the first one that really got any traction and tons of listeners, not just on Spotify, but also on YouTube. And I had a lot of people message me saying how they're big fans of Bioshock, but they didn't know that there was a prequel novel. And I had loads of people since who have gone out and bought the book and read it and agree with me of how good of a book it is, but also how perfect it would be for a movie. And since then, it's got me thinking the fact of how many other sort of tie novels to video games there are that people probably don't really know. Bring us to where we are today, or where I am now, or wherever you are in the world, listen to this. And I will say this now, and it might upset some people, despite my love for Dead Space, I won't be reviewing the video games, right? And the simple reason being is, like the concept and like the idea that I just proposed with the Bioshock novel, it's the same thing here. What I've never done with this podcast, I've never done what everybody else does. Everybody else would review the video games because, again, they are good games and they're worth delving into and reviewing. But for me, I want to do something different. I wanted to look at the other material, the other media of a game series. Now, Dead Space is one of those that is widely beloved and widely cared about by a lot of people. So it was the series that I wanted to look into. I'm also reviewing the Gears of War novels, and I will get around to doing the Halo novels as well. But I wanted to solely just focus on one game series, but just look at the extended media, and that's it. Maybe in the future, after I've done this deep dive into looking at the extended media, I will then look into the video games. But for now, I'm going to look at the extended media. So that means I'm going to be looking at the books. I'm going to be looking at the animated movies. Like, for example, I was only aware till quite recently, looking into it for this review, that there was 2 animated movies. You got Dead Space Downfall, which came out in October the 28th, 2008. And then you have Dead Space Aftermath, which came out in January the 25th, 2011. So you've got those. You also have the comics, which I've read one Dead Space comic, which I think was a prequel was set before the first game. You've also got Dead Space Extraction, Dead Space Martyr, Dead Space Salvage, Dead Space Catalyst, Dead Space Liberation. These are all novels. So I wanted to look into that. And like I said, I never really do anything with this podcast that everybody else does. Everybody else looks at the video games. Everybody else looks at blah blah blah. I want to do something different, and that is why. So I just wanted to kind of be open and honest about that first, because that's the way I've always been. If something is big in popularity, the less interested I am in it. Yeah, for example, I wanted to review for season 1 of the podcast. I wanted to review Starship Troopers. I'd bought the book. I wanted to read the book and to review the film, and I wanted to compare and contrast the differences. Right. Now I'm still planning on doing that, but the reason I didn't want to do it in season 1 is because as I was getting around to reading getting into wanting to read the book and then to review the movie and then review the other movies in the series, tons of podcasters that I know had reviewed the movie, and it was one after the other, and it just felt saturated. It just felt like everybody was talking about it, and I lost interest. So I pushed it on to season 2. Now, if you've been listening since season 1 and 2, you know that season 2 was very, very busy. Last year, I was busy with tons of things and never got around to it. So I am still planning on looking on Starship Troopers, but it will come later. Now, that's just one example. There are other examples of things that I want to look into that I've had to push back because loads of other people have talked about them, or there are ideas I have of like, well, nobody talks about this. Nobody is out there talking about the Bioshock novel. So it's one of those things. I have ideas of things that I want to talk about, but I want to make sure that other people aren't talking about it. And I'd be honest with you, if I was a listener of podcasts, I would want to listen to things that other people don't talk about. And that's my thinking behind it. So just to clarify really as to why I am going to be looking at the books and extended media and not the games. Maybe in the future I'll look at the games if this extended media deep dive is successful. And it'd be fun really to sort of read these novels and then to sort of play and review the games again and to see sort of the differences between them. Obviously, I've already played the Dead Space series all the way through, so when it comes to these book reviews, I can give my sort of knowledge of the games and how sort of the books and the movies tie in so well with each other in this world and in this lore. So that is my plans in reviewing the series going forwards. One quote that I want to read to you, which made me laugh while I was doing my research, was that it was on the wiki page. So if you go in Dead Space wiki, it's on the wiki page for this book, and it made me giggle, and it kind of well, I'll explain why afterwards. So right, it goes. Dead Space Martyr was released in July the 20th, 2010. The book notably features lore elements that were abandoned and retconned shortly after its release, rendering parts of its story non-canon. Now, if you know me, you know that I'm a stickler for canon. I love canon. I am not that I stick true to it sometimes. Like, for example, Doctor Who, I'm happy to waver, because how old Doctor Who is, I'm happy to waver the canon sometimes. It doesn't bother me as much as it bothers some people. But I tend to try and stick to canon as much as possible. If there is something that isn't technically canon, I don't tend to read it, watch it, play it, that sort of thing. So that kind of made me laugh. Now, I'm already reading the book, so I can't stop reading now, and I've already recorded the introduction, so obviously I'm going to review the book. But it made me laugh at the fact of how they retconned it, and I looked into it a bit deeper. And the reason being is the fact of when they had planned and was bringing up the lore of Dead Space 1, the actual video game itself, they wasn't too sure as to what they wanted to do with the markers, where they wanted to go with the whole idea of necromorphs and the markers. Now, when Dead Space came out and it was a success, they actually sat down and they started to get together a lore manual, a Bible. Every sort of series, every video game series, every TV series, movie, they always write a writer's Bible. They have a different names for it, but that's the best sort of idea, concept behind it, is they have a big tome which has all the lore for all the characters, all the... And I do this myself when I'm writing. I have a big booklet which has got all the characters, all the background lore, even things that will never be in the book, just in case if I ever decided to write a sequel or something like that, or do prequels, whatever. You always have that Bible, so you've got something to refer back to. And the artists have something to refer to, the writers have something to refer to. Everybody can refer back to this Bible of like, this is what Isaac should look like. This is what the Church of Unitology stands for, X, Y, and Z. So they actually got around to writing and finalizing this Bible for Dead Space 2, and that's why Dead Space 2 it goes a lot more harder into the lore than Dead Space 1, and then so forth with Dead Space 3, and so on. Even if you're not a fan of Dead Space 3, it still sort of opens up the lore a lot more. And what it meant was the fact of, because this book is technically a prequel to Dead Space 1, because it kind of explains the search of Unitology, and it also explains the markers and how it involves humans and how the markers came to be in X, Y, and Z. That a lot of the things in this story were sort of retconned. Was like, oh, we changed this, we'll get rid of that. That's not canon. So when I do get around to finishing the book and actually reading the sort of writing up the review, potentially I will mention things that are different, and if I notice anything that are different, I will sort of mention them as well in the review. It just kind of made me laugh as the fact of, I'm a stickler for canon, and just to read that was like, ugh. But when I actually looked deeper into it, and I found the reason as to why, it made sense to me. With the fact of, they didn't know that this game was going to be a success, and it was such a success that they wanted to make sequels, obviously, and they just sorted to like, okay, now we've got the success, now we've got the fan base, let's put a lot of work and planning and ideas into let's build out this world, let's build out Isaac, let's build out the whole idea of the markers and it all. So for that, I can't fault them, and I completely understand. My first initial thoughts of the book so far is that I'm really enjoying it. So far of the story, not to give away any spoilers, but we're in Earth, and that we are currently at a excavation site near a crater. I think they're in the in Mexico at the moment, where the Mayans are. So the area where the Mayans are and the Aztecs, that sort of side of the world. I don't know any terms of what it all means as of yet, because I think I'm only I think about 50 to about 60 pages in. So I'm still slowly starting to get an idea of why they're on Earth at the moment, why they're not in space or wherever. You get introduced to Altman, who is the sort of leader, the founder of the Church of Unitology. So you meet him, and you meet a few extra people, a few extra sort of government bodies that have sort of secret interests in whatever this sort of signal is. Because they found a signal in the deep jungle as they were doing some mining, and they sent this research team in to kind of research this signal as to what it is, why you have these gravitational waves and all that sort of jazz. And then you have this side story with this little tribe that are being affected by this signal. Obviously, I don't know a lot, and obviously I don't want to give away spoilers, of just in case anybody wants to read the book with me. And if you do, please do let me know. If you have if you are going to read the book with me, let me know down in the comments, because it'd be fascinating to get somebody else's feel of what they feel of this book is, if they've read it before or if you're currently reading it with me. But yeah, it seems interesting. Like, it's well written so far. Like, there's nothing I can fault it on the writing. It all seems very fun. It seems very interesting, very spooky. There are parts in it which of pure body horror, which again, it needs to be. If you're going to do anything with Dead Space, it has to be grotesque, it has to be body horror, and there are a few bits in that so far. Hopefully there is more. So overall, my first initial thoughts is I'm intrigued. Genuinely, I'm intrigued. I'm interested. I'm already sucked into the story because of my love of Dead Space. So I'm already invested. I've gone in with 100%. So far, I'm still at 100%. So it hasn't dropped yet. It might do when I get to review. Something might happen in the next few pages where I'm like, oh, this is a load of BS. You know, this is crap. Or it might not. We'll see. But until then, until that point, my initial thoughts are it's very, very good. It's very interesting, very fascinating. I want to know what this signal is. I have a feeling, I have a theory, a hypothesis of what I would imagine this signal to be, because of my sort of knowledge of the lore of Dead Space. So I have a feeling of what it might be, but I feel yeah. Well, I was about to say maybe I'm wrong, but to be honest, I don't think I am, because if I am wrong, then I don't know. It wouldn't be as good as a book as I hope, and it wouldn't seem to. It might. I don't know how it would tie into Dead Space. So I feel like I am right, but we'll see. We will see in the review. But that is all she wrote. That is the introduction. So I'm going to go off now, personally, and I'm going to go off and continue reading. You lucky beans, in the next probably few seconds, are going to listen to my full review of this book. So strap in, get yourself some hot chocolate, turn the lights down, get yourself in a nice dark room, some ambience, some spooky, some Tubuly bells, from The Exorcist. That sort of creepy vibe going. And yeah, let's get into it, shall we? The Dead Space Martyr. Boom, let's go. Right, so I've not long finished reading Dead Space Martyr, and I took some time away to really sort of get my thoughts together, write up my notes for this review, and overall, sort of my first impressions is that I really like this book. It's great. It's a 4 star. So the way I like to rate any of books that I read is between 5 stars and 1 star. 5 stars, excellent. Change your life. Best book you ever read. It's perfect. There's nothing wrong with it. 5 stars. A 4 star is great. It's fantastic. There's a lot to say about it. A lot of things that you liked. Maybe one or two things stops it from being absolutely perfect, but overall, great book. And then you get a 3, which is just good. 3 is middle of the road. 3 isn't bad, but it isn't great. It's okay. It's all right. It's good. A 2 is meh. It's like, well, I read it, but it was one of them. You kind of shook your shoulders and go, eh. And then you have a 1 star, which is just don't bother. But for this book, it's a 4 star. It's a solid, great, fantastic read, especially if you're a fan of Dead Space. If you're listening to this review and you are a fan of Dead Space and you want to know if the book is worth it, then I say yes. Even with all the scrapped canon and the inconsistencies, which I will get into later on, even with all that, it is still enjoyable. You could honestly switch your brain off and read it through and not really be worried or phased about any lore. I've said it before, and I said in the introduction, I am a stickler for lore. I love to delve deep into lore about things that I enjoy, whether it be Doctor Who or Gears of War, Halo, Dead Space. If there is huge amounts of lore that goes into a world that I enjoy, I want to know everything about that world, so I will go venture off and read the comics, watch the animated movies, read the books, X, Y, and Z. I will do that, and that's the kind of person I am. And the sort of extended media are made for people like me. And I would say, with that respect, you will enjoy it. But even if you've never read or played anything Dead Space related, you'll still get a kick here. You still enjoy it because it is a solid horror, grotesque book. Dead Space is steeped in that science fiction space gore. Best way to explain it, if you've watched Event Horizon, which was actually an inspiration for Dead Space, which I love Event Horizon. I reviewed it in my first season. If you haven't listened to that review, go back and check it out. If you haven't watched Event Horizon, it's on Disney Plus, and I think it's on a few other things. It's a fantastic movie, but especially if you're a Dead Space fan, you'll appreciate it, enjoy it more, because of the subject matter in that film. But even if, like I said, you weren't a fan of Dead Space, you will still get a kick out of it here, because if you like horror, if you like gore, if you like dismemberment, if you like mystery and intrigue and hallucinations and people losing their minds, to me it's absolutely fascinating. Because the story follows Michael Altman. Altman is the face of Unitology. Unitology is the religion of the Marker. If anybody doesn't know what the Marker is, the basic crash course of the Marker. So Marker is a device. It is a monument, a statue, a figure, whatever you want to call it. It is a device that talks to sentient beings, really talks to people, talks to alien races, and that it uses the dead, dead loved ones. I'm trying my best to do a brief version, because if I could go into huge amounts of detail about the Marker, but we'd be here for ages. Well, basically, it uses dead loved ones to converse with you, to convince you that the Marker is good, that the Marker is great, that you want to do what the marker says, that you want to believe in it, and that you want to give yourself to the marker, and that it's the benefit of you and benefit of humanity and all that jazz. And that in itself is incredible, right? But then you take it to the stage of where you have like Michael Altman, where he is trying to solve the mystery as to why because the way the story starts is that there's a signal, there's a pulse in Chicxulub. I'm going to call it Chicxulub because I could never pronounce it when I read the book. But there's a place in Mexico, Chicxulub, and there's a signal coming from this old ancient crater that they believe wiped out the dinosaurs. And Altman's there with his partner Ada, and they're trying to figure out what this signal is, what is going on, why is it only now we started to detect it. And as the story goes on, as people, other scientists and other sort of groups and organizations start to get interest in this signal, that's when the hallucinations start to come. And that's, as the story goes, things start to become more clear, especially if you played the games. You'll see creatures, you'll have events and certain things that happen that will come clearer to you if you're a fan of the games. The hallucinations, the creatures, the writing, the cutting them, like cutting, trigger warning, but there is suicide and there is self-harm and stuff like that in this book. And the things like that are triggering to you, probably best to stay away from it. But there are moments like these where people cut themselves and write on the walls in blood. It's very psychotic. It's very insane and crazy. But that is what that is what the marker does to you. It sends you loopy. It sends you delulu, and that's kind of the weak-willed and the strong-willed. The weak-willed are able to resist and push back, like Michael Altman, where he can push and not let the marker take over. But other people some are more willing to believe what the marker has to say, and those that are more willing, some are sort of chosen by the marker to be spared, others are just lose it completely and try to kill all non-believers and try to kill themselves, and are sort of tormented by their loved ones more and more till eventually they unlive themselves, shall we say. And those moments, especially if you love horror, if you love gore, are incredible because you get to see the decline, where you get somebody who is clever, is smart, who is got all their faculty, all their senses, and there's a scene when it first starts to happen, and it's a long scene. It's about 2 chapters long, but 2 people go down in a submarine, and they're going down to see what this signal is. They're going down into the crater to try to find out what is going on. And as the submarine goes down further and further and closer to the signal, that one of the guys starts losing his mind. He starts seeing his dead loved ones, and he's talking to himself. And the other guy's like, "What are you talking to? Shut up! What's going on?" And the other guy's like, "I gotta be quiet. I gotta be quiet." Yeah. And then he's talking to his loved ones, and he's whispering to them, and you get this real delve into madness. And it happens a few times with multiple characters, and it's interesting to see how quick some people fall into madness and how for others it's gradual. And then you see Altman and how he resists it. I find really, really fascinating to me, because it's very much to do with psychology and the idea of the mind and strength of conviction and constitution and stuff like that. I find that absolutely fascinating. But this story is split up into what I like to think 3 sections. There's more sections than that, but I like to think it's 3 sections. So you have the discovery, which is the first part of the book, which is discovery, which we have a signal, trying to figure out what the signal is. We find out that the signal is coming from some device that people start calling it the marker, and that from this marker, people start getting hallucinations. People are starting to go crazy. People are starting to die and unlive themselves. And as that story sort of comes and goes to an end, then you have part 2. Part 2 is basically the research, trying to understand as to why people are doing this, trying to understand what the marker is, where it came from, why is it only now sort of pulsating this signal and trying to realize what this signal means. How does it affect humans? Why is it affecting us? Is it affecting anything else? Is it affecting any creatures that, like fish that swim around in the deep parts of where it was hidden in the crater? Are they being affected? As well, you've got the sort of Altman. He's trying his best at this point. He's more involved now in this part of the story, and he's trying to convince that other people who are now becoming believers of the marker, where you sort of see the origins of the Church of Unitology start to form. And this part kind of made me laugh because it feels very Life of Brian sort of moments where, because how many times Altman's been down in the submarine, how many times he's been like physically close to the marker, and the marker's had no effect on him at all, and he has gone down with other people, and other people have lost their minds. They've tried to attack him, and he's had to knock a lot of people out because of this. They see Altman as the Messiah, as the sort of leading figure of this new religion, this new sort of church that they want to set up around the marker. And like they're all sitting there going, he's the one, he's the one, he's the Messiah. And he's looking at them like, you're all crazy. I'm not your leader. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't want anything to do with this. I just want to get myself and my wife out of here. But his wife has already fallen for this whole believer, because she's seen her dead mother, even though. And this what a bit kind of confused me, and I guess it kind of comes up with the scrap canon as well. But you get the moments with the dead loved ones where they're trying to warn people of like, don't listen to the marker, don't trust the marker, don't let it do convergence, and the whole idea of trying to figure out what convergence is. Obviously, myself and other people who have played the Dead Space games will know what convergent is, will know the whole idea behind hallucinations and seeing the dead and all that. But it really sort of confused me where like the dead are telling the people of like, don't listen to the marker's bad, and everybody's going, they're thinking, well, it might be all right. It might be okay. So that bit kind of lost me a little bit, but I still managed to enjoy it because the writing was there. But going back to the Messiah bit, which made me laugh, was that you would just get those moments where they would go, he is the Messiah. And it was just like Life of Brian, where he was like, I am not the Messiah. I don't want to be the Messiah. And they're all sitting there going, oh, he's just being bashful. He doesn't know. He's so humble. He is enlightened that he doesn't think he is when he is, and all this jazz. And you've got Altman that's like, I don't want to be here. I'm being made to stay here. I'm not allowed to leave. I'm stuck with the crazy people that are unliving themselves and believe in this marker, which I believe the marker is evil, but nobody believes me. So it's like really you get the beginning, which is discovery, the middle, which is like the learning and the sort of origins of Unitology, and then you have the last piece of the book, the last chapter, when it's all gone to pot. It's all gone wrong. The marker is finally achieved, shall we say, convergence with one person, with one scientist, and all it takes is one. It's kind of like the flood in Halo. All it takes is one flood pod, and that's it. You can take out a whole civilization. One of the scientists loses his mind, and the marker transforms him into a necromorph. Obviously, they're not called necromorphs in this story because this book is a prequel, so it's set before the games. So there's no name for what these creatures are. They're just called the creatures and monsters. But obviously, if you play the games, you know they're necromorphs. But it all goes apart. The whole facility that they're in, where the marker's being held, you've got Altman and other scientists are trying to fight their way through. They can't, because as we know with the necromorphs, you can't. They're like, you can't shoot necromorphs. You can't just shoot them in the face or shoot their heads off, because it doesn't work that way. You have to dismember them. You have to take off their limbs. You have to. What I used to do in the video games was, if one of them was running at you, you take the legs out. That wouldn't stop them. They would still crawl towards you. But what you would do, you'd take the legs out, and then you'd take an arm off, and then you'd walk over and then you'd stamp on it. That would be the best way to deal with it. Unless they're coming at you really, really quickly, then you take the arms off first, then the legs. It depends on which necromorph you were dealing with. But what I love about the last chapter of the book is that it feels like the video game, where you have Altman trying to get through the facility with a plasma cutter, and he's learning, as you would in the game, that I can't just shoot them in the chest. Ballistic weapons doesn't work. I can't just shoot them. That's not doing anything. You need a plasma cutter. You need something that's hot enough that's going to go through the toughened skin, go through bone, and dismember them. And Altman does. He dismembers them. He stamps on them. He takes them out. He gets strangled by different these like I can't remember what they're called in the game now, but they're the ones that run up to you and they try to crawl up your body with tentacles and they wrap themselves around your neck as they try to force themselves down your throat. I can't remember the names of them now, but they're there. They are there, and you've got other versions of the necromorphs where you've got two people that have been conjoined together, so it's like one big mush. And obviously, the descriptions are fantastic. The writing is fantastic at this point. Obviously, I already knew what a necromorph looked like, so it wasn't hard for me to really translate in my head of what I was meant to be visualizing. And I really enjoy it. Like overall, like say, my first impressions of this book is that if you are a Dead Space fan, it is worth it. Even with the non-canon, the scrapped parts, it's still enjoyable. If it wasn't to be part of the Dead Space franchise, if it was just a standalone horror novel, it would do perfectly on its own. That's how much fun I had out of it, anyway. But yeah, so you do get Altman, you do get Ada. They're the main sort of characters you have. You meet other scientists as well, like Field and what's his name? So you got Fields. You've got a German scientist called Gove. You've got other people from organizations like Dredger Corp, Markov, Rex, Hennessy. You meet loads of different people, but each person that you meet, I knew not to get attached to them because I knew that not many of them would basically be alive by the end of the book, which I was right in that regard. Not really a spoiler, especially if you know Dead Space and you know how the marker works. It's just a given that unless you are a main character and you have plot armor, you're not going to make it, basically. So yeah, first impression's great. I love the characters. I love the story. It all works fantastically. It's really well written. Now, to talk about the scrapped and non-canon sort of lore elements, I've got two quotes here from Chuck Beaver, who is the writer of Dead Space, the original writer of Dead Space. So this is from an interview he did in 2012. He went, Dead Space 2 was a huge challenge. All these elements from the original game that were poorly thought through, like the marker lore, necro ecology, etc., had to be moved to a more coherently forward into the next narrative. The first story we had was a wreck of unrelated events and broken structure, so we cut our teeth getting that into shape and didn't fully make it. Plus, we got lost a bit in complicated lore and plot elements that didn't come through. And then he did another one quite recently in 2023 where he said, the only lesson learned is please don't let your lore stay uncompletely figured out until until the end of the development of the second game, because it will be painful for everybody, right? So Dead Space Martyr presents several glaring lore and story inconsistencies with the rest of the Dead Space franchise, especially material released after it. While the broader sequence of events from the book's plot is understood to have still happened, most of the big lore elements and reveals from Martyr's story have been ignored and contradicted by newer Dead Space media, even by B.K. Emerson, the writer of this book, in his second novel, Dead Space Catalyst, which I hope to get to that one soon. Most notably, all throughout Martyr, the hallucinations experienced by the characters are openly opposed to the marker and its plans, actively helping humans prevent convergence and warning them about the dangers of studying the marker. It is revealed near the end of the book that the hallucinations are not a function of the marker, but of something else that stood in opposition to it, of something that was ingrained in Altman's own brain. According to franchise co-writer Chuck Beaver, this was the result of his desire to add some positivity to the franchise's narrative, while Dead Space 2 was in production. As Martyr was written early on in the sequel's development, since the original Dead Space had not fully developed its lore and never elaborated on what exactly the goals of the Nicole Brennan hallucinations were, and why she seemed to be helping Isaac Clarke, Chuck Beaver and necromorph designer Ben Wanat were left in charge of the lore for Dead Space 2 and had to choose a definitive direction for the markers and the hallucinations. Beaver wanted there to be a force for good fighting against a force for evil around the markers, what with the hallucinations being the result of backlash from human DNA or the spirits of your loved ones helping humanity, and personally insert this aspect into Martyr. However, Ben Wanner was opposed to the idea and wanted everything about the markers to be all evil all the way through. However, following this disagreement, which Beaver described as really rough, Ben Wannant's vision of the law was decided upon for the franchise after Martyr, effectively retconning the story of the book. It should be noted, however, that the hallucinations as depicted in Martyr are not consistent with Nicole's vision from the original Dead Space either. Nicole's dialogue in the original game implies that she is the marker itself, as she repeatedly tells Isaac to return to me and make us whole, while with Isaac even staring into his personal journal that Nicole was the marker all along and that the artifact must be sentient. This is in stark contrast to hallucinations in Martyr, which make a clear distinction between themselves and the marker and, in fact, use us to refer to humanity. Within the context of Martyr, it is not clear what make us whole would even mean, and the phrase is used only once in the book, with its meaning being left entirely unknown. Another perplexing aspect of this is that Dead Space Extraction was released roughly 10 months before Martyr, with Extraction portraying the hallucinations as clearly evil and originating from the marker, to the point that the game's entire first chapter involves the hallucinations driving Sam Cadwell to become paranoid and murder his fellow miners, while another plot point revolves around Lexi Murdoch not experiencing any visions and thus being seen as a beacon of safety against the marker, though this can be explained by Chuck Beaver not being involved in the writing of Extraction, as he was later with Martyr. Extraction was solely written by Anthony Johnston. It suggests that other writers were not on board with Beaver's vision during this time. Some elements of Chuck Beaver's original ideas for the lore can be found in the game files of Dead Space 2, presumably having been cut following his disagreement with Ben Wannant. This cut content consists of a scrapped audio log describing how humanity was seemingly created by an alien force that was at war with the markers, and how the hallucinations were the result of a genetic defense mechanism implanted from this ancient race, and a number of scrapped lines of dialogue between Isaac and benevolent Nicole guiding him to destroy the marker. Other inconsistencies that we had, so you had the limitless energy provided by the black marker, which is the marker in the book, signal, which is repeatedly stated in the lore after Martyr to be of interest to humanity due to the ongoing resource crisis, is never mentioned or alluded to in the novel, nor is the aforementioned crisis. Instead, Markov, who is one of the main villains of the story, initially shows interest in the marker due to its potential for weapons manufacturing. Dead Space 2, Dead Space Aftermath, and Dead Space Salvage established that the necromorphs require the marker signal to be active. Without the presence of the signal, they collapse into an organic soup. However, in Martyr, after Altman shows the marker that he knows how to replicate it and cause it to fall silent and stop broadcasting its signal, the necromorphs in the floating compound are still active and attempt to kill him. Afterwards, the marker and the facility are sunk by Altman. Yet Markov and Stevens are able to create a brute and unleash it on Altman regardless. That part really confused me because, again, I knew when I read that part of like, well, now Altman's turned the marker off. The marker shouldn't, like, the necromorphs should just fall to pieces. They should just die. But they don't. And it, like I said, it's, even though these inconsistencies don't bother me, and I still had a fantastic time, and you will too if you like this sort of stuff, and if you're a fan of Dead Space. I'm still a stickler for lore. So it's these small inconsistencies like this that made no sense to me. So I was a bit like, hold on a second. If the marker's not on, if nobody's turned it on, then nothing should be happening. That's kind of how it works. But again, when you delve deep and you understand that they didn't actually have the whole lore set until Dead Space 2 came out, which actually Dead Space 2 is the best Dead Space game of the whole trilogy, in my opinion, but I feel like most people agree with me there anyway. Um, that it makes sense as to why it happens in the book. But again, it's small things here or there that if you don't let it bother you, it's not an issue. Um, Anyway, furthermore, the concept of the marker deliberately stopping its signal broadcast altogether, as the black marker does several times in Martyr, is not featured in any other piece of lore, which instead deal with the signal varying in its intensity or frequency, rather than its presence or outright absence, the latter only appearing to be the case when a marker is severely damaged/destroyed, as was the case with marker 3A. In Martyr, the characters commonly use holopods and holoscreens, while later lore established that hologram technology did not exist in the 23rd century. Like I said, so it is small inconsistencies here and there, but overall, I feel like you will enjoy it. Even like, take it from me, as I've said many times in the introduction and in this part of the review, I am a huge love of lore, and that usually if the lore is disturbed, it puts me off wanting to read it or play it, or really look into it. It depends how much I enjoy it, that if I'm willing to come away from lore, or sort of, if lore is to be changed, if it makes sense, then I'm with it, that sort of thing. Kind of the reason why I haven't read the last Mass Effect book yet, because of how bad that book was. And trust me, when we get there, I will read it, and I will rip that book a new one, and for all the lore problems, because I've already read parts that a friend borrowed me the book, and I read sections, and I was really upset of how bad the lore was treated. But we'll get there when we get there. The point is I'm trying to make is the fact of, even somebody like me who is a stickler for lore, I still feel like you will enjoy this book for what it is, for what it tries to do. Like I said, the events of the book still happen. It's just certain things were changed and retconned to fit the narrative more of Dead Space 2. But like I said, if you've played Dead Space, Dead Space 2, Dead Space 3, if you've played the series and you enjoy it and you know the lore, it still shouldn't bother you even more, because you like, well, I know why the marker, how the marker works, what the marker is trying to do. Like, so there was a few times where I sat there and went, that's not how the marker works. The marker doesn't do that. This makes no sense. And I tried to think to myself, well, maybe because this is the proto marker, this is the original marker, and that the reason why it doesn't work like that with other markers is because those are the markers that were made by humanity. Because the marker in Dead Space 1 and I believe Dead Space 2 were made, if I remember that correctly, they were made by humanity. So you've got the black marker and then you've got the red marker. And they were the black marker was the original, and everything else was a copy. Basically, was a remake of the original sort of markers. Even at the end, even the new, even the secret ending at the end of the new Dead Space game sets it up to where Isaac Clarke is going to make his own marker, which will then be the red marker. It depends on where they decide to go with the story. But I just find it interesting overall, really, with Dead Space, is how many times the lore has been changed. Whereas the lore was changed again in Dead Space 3. I enjoyed Dead Space 3. A lot of people didn't. I completely understand as to why. But the lore was changed with Dead Space 3. And even Chuck Beaver, the sort of the head writer, he said if we ever got a chance to do a Dead Space 4, he would have wanted to change a lot of things. So it kind of interests me how the lore is always changing in this world, how they're trying to retcon things, how they change things. Because I see Dead Space 3 deals with an alien race, an alien civilization, and how it dealt with the necromorphs, how it dealt with their marker that they had. I find it's a really interesting story, but obviously I know a lot of people don't like it. But it interests me. But Chuck Beaver, he said recently, I read an article, I can't remember where I read it from, but with the release of the recent Dead Space remake, which again, fantastic. If you haven't played it, it's on Game Pass. I highly recommend to give it a go. It's incredible. But obviously the way it sets up the end of that game with the true ending, and with the success of the Dead Space remake, they're definitely going to make the remake Dead Space 2, which I can't wait for that. That's going to be a hell of a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to seeing what story changes they've made and what narrative changes are going to be made as well. I look forward to seeing that. But I hope that the second one does well, so they can remake the third game. And Chuck Berry, that's the singer, wrong person. Chuck Beaver, Chuck Beaver said that he wanted to be involved in the final game, story wise, and to kind of point it in the direction that he wanted the story to go. I haven't played the DLC for Dead Space 3, but I've been told that the DLC for Dead Space 3, the story DLC, kind of goes in the direction that they wanted and hoped to go with the fourth game that never got made, sadly. But that's another story for another day. But I think it'd be interesting to see if he was allowed to come back, how he would change it, and how much, obviously, like I said, the Dead Space narrative change. It's always changing, like the necromorphs, like what the marker does to humanity, how it changes our DNA, how it's meant to be our next stage of evolution. Even with all that, it's how, like, that's how it works, and but the lore changes just as much. I just find it really interesting. But yeah, so like my final thoughts is that if you are a fan of Dead Space, or even if you're not, if you're looking for something that is full of horror, full of gore, full of dismemberment, full of psychological sort of horror, this is perfect for you. More so if you like the games, or even if you like things like Event Horizon, then this book is perfect for you. It's easy to look over the scrapped canon, especially if you've never played any of the games. It wouldn't bother you at all. If you have played the games, it probably won't bother you either, because it is really well written. It is fun. It's interesting. It's not overly long. It's about 415 pages, so it's not huge. It's not going to take you forever to read it. It took me in total, well, to be honest, it took me a month, mainly because I had other things I had to do. I had other reviews and other episodes I had to record, so I could only get a few hours to read every day. So it took me longer than it normally would to read a book of this size. But if you've got nothing else to do, or if you're going to read it on the bus or audiobook or that sort of thing, best way to do it. One of the downsides is that this book is considered as a collectible now. So it's really hard to find a physical copy of this book for a decent price. So I would recommend, if you've got Amazon, if you've got Kindle, buy it on Kindle. It's about £3 on Kindle. I bought it on ebook. There is no audiobook, sadly, either. So if you can find a physical copy, or you know somebody who has it, perfect. Otherwise, your only other option is ebook. But it's not so bad. I read it on ebook, even though I like to read physical. I wasn't paying stupid money for a physical copy of this book, just because I didn't enjoy it. And I did enjoy it, but I didn't know until I read it. But yeah, overall thoughts is read it. That's my final words on it, is read it. You will enjoy it. It's fantastic. So I look forward to reading the next one, which is Dead Space Catalyst. That book is set 250 years in the future. Extinction threatens mankind. Tampering with dangerous technology from the Black Marker, an ancient alien artifact discovered on Earth 80 years earlier, Earth by EarthGov, hopes to save humanity, but the Marker's influence reanimates corpses into grotesques, rampaging nightmares. Steeped in desperation, deceit, and hubris, the history of the Marker reveals our ominous future. So I look forward to that one. Like, it's set in the future. It's more in line, I would imagine, with the time frame of the games as well. So I'm excited. It's shorter. It's only 367 pages. I believe this book to be a rare one as well, physically. So I will have to find this book somewhere secondhand if I can. Otherwise, it's ebook for me. Or see if I've got any friends of mine who still have this book. We will see. But yeah, so the next one will be Dead Space Catalyst. But if I can't find it, we probably won't. But I'll update you all on Twitter, Nerdstalgic_pod. But I am hoping to look at the animated movies that I've never watched. So I'll be watching and reviewing them in the meantime. So until then, thank you very, very much for listening to my review of Dead Space Martyr by BK Iverson, and I hope to see you in the next one. So You've been listening to the Nerdstalgic podcast. I've been your host, Luke the Human, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye bye.